Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first National Integrity Summit hosted by Transparency International PNG with the support from the European Union. My name is Ariane, and I lead the team at Transparency International PNG. A few housekeeping rules before we start. For participants here at the venue, the toilets are on the right as you walk out at the first hallway, down towards your right. If there is an emergency and we need to evacuate, exit down the stairs and follow the instructions of the fire marshals. I also ask that your phones be put on silent. I also ask permission to take pictures at this event. We have a few photographers from SpiderTech, WK Photography, and of course TIPNG. If you have any issues with your photo being taken, please alert one of the TIPNG staff members so we can notify the photographers. We will also have a live stream for Facebook for the opening session of the Integrity Summit. For our participants on Zoom and on Facebook, I welcome each and every one of you, and thank you for making time to also join us virtually for this opening session. A reminder that you're only registered for this opening session, so if you would like to register for the first panel, you have time to do so now. If you are posting about the summit on social media, please tag our social media handles and use the hashtags that we have provided. A run-through of the program for the opening session. We will have a short welcome by the Chair of Transparency International, Mr. Peter Aitsi, followed by opening remarks from the Deputy Head of Delegation, Dr. Silviu Jora. We will then have the presentation of the key findings of the National Integrity Systems Assessment 2021 by TIPNG Deputy Director Partnerships and Policy, Mr. Yuambari Haihuie. We will then invite the Prime Minister to give his keynote address on the theme of the summit. The opening session will come to a close, and we will break for morning tea while we also give time to our online participants to prepare for the first panel of the National Integrity Summit. So on behalf of Transparency International PNG, I welcome you all to the opening session of the first National Integrity Summit. To our audience online, thank you for taking the time to also be present for this session. I would like to start by first acknowledging the presence of the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honourable James Marape. The Deputy Head of the EU Delegation to PNG, Dr. Silviu Jora. The Chair of Transparency International PNG, Mr. Peter Aitsi. Secretary for the National Judicial Staff and Services, Mr. Jack Carrico. Chairman of the Interim ICAC Committee, Mr. Thomas Elu. And Parliamentary Counsel, Mr. Richard Whitchurch. I also take this time to welcome and acknowledge the presence of senior government representatives, integrity institutions, private sector, the media, and civil society. I acknowledge those online who have registered for this session, notably our partners in the region, in Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and the United States. We also have those joining us from our sister chapters around the world via Zoom. Most importantly, I must acknowledge the people of Papua New Guinea who are joining us this morning on the Facebook live stream. We are a chapter of Transparency International, a global coalition dedicated to fighting corruption. At Transparency International PNG, we are committed to working with a sense of urgency and purpose to ensure that Papua New Guineans are bold enough to stand up against all forms of corruption. We want to critically but constructively engage with all stakeholders and encourage popular demand for good governance and accountability. This summit brings together 28 agencies and organizations that participated in the National Integrity System Assessment. Anti-corruption experts, stakeholders of TIPNG, and other relevant bodies to witness the launch of the National Integrity System Assessment Report and discuss ways in which we can bridge the integrity gap. I feel it's important to pause and acknowledge the organizations that participated in the National Integrity Systems Assessment. The National Parliament, the Constitutional Law Reform Commission, Office of the Legislative Council, Department of Justice and Attorney General, Department of the Prime Minister, National Judicial Staff Services, Office of the Public Prosecutor, Department of Provincial and Local Level Government Affairs, Department of Finance, Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary, PNG Customs Service, PNG Immigration and Citizenship Authority, PNG Electoral Commission, the Auditor General's Office, National Economic and Fiscal Commission, National Fraud and Anti-Corruption Directorate, the Interim ICAC Office, the Financial Analysis and Supervision Unit of the Bank of PNG, the Integrity of Political Parties and Candidates Commission, One Talk Newspaper, Catholic Bishops' Conference of Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, Center for Environmental Law and Community Rights, Advancing PNG Women Leaders Network, Center for International Private Enterprise, Certified Practicing Accountants of PNG, PNG Investment Promotion Authority, PNG Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Secretariat, and the Business Council of PNG. Your participation in the NISA signifies your commitment to greater integrity for our nation, for a nation built on integrity, values, transparency. So without further ado, I would now like to invite the Chair of Transparency International PNG, Mr. Peter Aitsi, to give his welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Ariane. Good morning on behalf of TIPNG, and I echo Ariane's welcome to the first National Integrity Summit 2021. It's wonderful to see so many supporters of the work of TI here with us today. As introduced, my name is Peter Aitsi and I'm the current chair of TIPNG. I do want to thank all of you for showing your commitment to strengthening the national integrity systems that we'll present to you today in terms of the analysis of that system. Your commitment is shown by your attendance today and the contribution that you've made to the study itself, so I thank you for that. Ariane's acknowledged a number of important groups that have taken part in this analysis. On this occasion, I do want to really highlight the commitment of our Prime Minister, Honourable James Marape, for his support of this work, and also for the European Union and their support for the work of TI as well in conducting this work. So both of the heads of those are with us today, and I'd like to extend my thanks to both of you for your support. Thank you. Importantly also, I'd like, in the room we have our Ambassador Ivan Pomalu, our Secretary for PM. So Ivan, thank you also for your continued support and leadership of the National Integrity Task Force and the work and the important work that they'll take on on the back of this report. Our members of the diplomatic mission that are here as well have also acknowledged their support for the work of TI and also their support towards our country, PNG. Importantly, the work of the media. Of recent times, the media has come under a little bit of intimidation and threat. I do want to remind us all that the media is an important pillar within our integrity systems, and at all times we must protect the work of the media and professionals within the media industry. On this occasion, I'd also like to thank our team at TI, led by our CEO, Ariane Kasman, for the hard work that they put into the work of TI. So thank you very much for your commitment and your tireless work in carrying out the work of TI. Now, I know, as Ariane has indicated, we've got a small audience here with us in person because of our COVID restrictions. But I must say that we've got an online audience from my last update, which numbers about 500. and I think 500 plus now that are joining us via Facebook and also Zoom. So thank you for all of our audience that have joined us via those platforms. To all of you, a warm welcome, our friends and supporters in Papua New Guinea and also abroad, for joining us this morning at APEC House in Port Moresby. As I indicated, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the work of the European Union in Papua New Guinea. The European Union has been a long-term great supporter of PNG and also Transparency International in Papua New Guinea. We do share a common value, values of democracy, justice and human rights. And last Sunday we marked the EU Day, and TIPNG was proud to show examples of that partnership, which included the Open Parliament project and more recently TI's observation of the conduct of the 2019 Bougainville referendum. In fact, this Integrity Summit, as we've made known, has been made possible by the funding provided by the EU, and Dr. Jora will make a few remarks on behalf of the European Union as part of the opening program. I'd also like to say a few words about Transparency International PNG on this occasion. At TIPNG, we work to empower the people in Papua New Guinea to take action against corruption. It's a simple mission statement, but it served us well since our incorporation in 1997, for those that have memory, by our founding chairman, the late Sir Anthony Silviu, a keen advocate and a true leader and a statesman, and somebody who is committed to the fight against corruption. It's now been 25 years since the establishment of TI. We strive to be reliable partners for like-minded individuals and organisations who are also committed to fighting corruption. TIPNG is a homegrown organisation managed and supported by committed Papua New Guineans and friends of PNG. We seek to play a role to challenge the national consciousness on issues of corruption by advocating good governance and the adherence to the rule of law. We're not an organisation that investigates, arrests or prosecutes cases of corruption, but we are a civil society organisation that aims to help build and strengthen our systems and processes that can assist us to combat corruption and expose individuals who are involved in corrupt activities. TIPNG is a membership-based organisation comprising of individuals like you who want to work together to build a better Papua New Guinea free of the scourge of corruption. On this occasion, our key message is to help us build, or help Papua New Guinea build integrity together, to work together to build integrity and strengthen the level of integrity within our country. In welcoming you to this first National Integrity Summit, I'd like to touch on the ideal of integrity and why it is vital to the well-being of our society and our nation. It's been commonly said that integrity is what you do when no one is watching. This is in part true. Integrity is a matter of character, and the values you aspire to uphold as a person are very much part of that description of integrity. It's often reflected by the actions you take, but also equally reflected by the actions you don't take when you are placed in situations that challenge your principles and values. Within the global transparency movement, the technical definition of integrity is as follows: behaviours and actions that are consistent with a set of moral and ethical principles and standards that are embraced by individuals as well as institutions and by your society. So first and foremost, we must establish a set of principles and standards. Secondly, we as individuals and collectively as institutions and a society must embrace and accept these shared principles and standards as being standards that will guide our behaviour and conduct as a society. Importantly, if we are to reflect high levels of integrity in our communities, our behaviours and actions at the leadership level must be consistent with these standards. We need to be the example. The launch of the National Integrity Systems Assessment this morning and the panels over the next 2 days will be a fundamental step in this direction, we believe. The good news is that we've already have these standards. They are very much in our Constitution and in our laws. The challenge, as always, is in the application and the enforcement of these standards so they become embedded as the way our society behaves, embedded in our systems, embedded in our institutions, embedded in us. This is our biggest challenge, and it'll require courageous and committed leadership and a longer-term vision of what PNG should look like. In closing, I thank you for joining TIPNG at the first National Integrity Summit 2021, and I encourage all of us to work together so that we can rise above corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Peter Aitsi, Chair of Transparency International PNG. As Peter stated in his opening remarks, today we continue the legacy that was left behind by our founding chairman, the late Sir Anthony Siaguru, but also prior to Sir Anthony's desire to set up Transparency International PNG. I would also like to acknowledge the late Sir Kipling Uyari, who was very instrumental in the discussions around the formation of a Transparency International chapter. And so today I want to also acknowledge the late Sir Kipling Uyari. They both shared a common vision, a simple vision, to protect the integrity of the people, society, and the nation. So without further ado, I now welcome the Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation to Papua New Guinea, Dr. Silviu Jora, to give his opening remarks.
So, Honourable Prime Minister, distinguished representatives of the national authorities, all protocol observed, distinguished representatives of the civil society, dear virtual audience, I know you are so many out there, ladies and gentlemen. Primarily, I would like to thank Transparency International PNG for organizing this important event. Only 10 days ago, the European Union and Transparency International stood together to celebrate the World Press Freedom Day. And today we are proud to launch this National Integrity Summit, the first in PNG, and a clear expression of the importance we place on enhancing transparency and integrity in this country. The fight against corruption, as it has been already said, is one of the most serious challenges we face. It affects businesses, the functioning of the public administration, and hinders development. Corruption harms people that are most in need of public goods and services. Even worse, the COVID-19 pandemic is creating new opportunities to divert funds away from people, and therefore we need to be more vigilant than before. I will also state that as the European Union, we are not here to teach lessons, but to share lessons from our experience in fighting corruption. Most countries in the world are experiencing corruption in various degrees, and Europe is not exception of, you might know, particularly southern and eastern parts of the continent. But we have learned to address these issues, and we have some good results to share, and this is important. We stand together against corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, in December 2020, the EU and PNG government signed the EU-PNG Partnership for Good Governance, a 5-year program with an allocated amount of EU funding of about 115 million kina. And we are sure that this program, that is due to start soon, will make a difference in our common fight for good governance. Of course, I will also mention the project we have with Transparency International on monitoring corruption, funded under the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights. I would also like to mention recently under the current Marape government, we have witnessed indeed a number of genuine efforts in recognizing the issues and trying to find ways to address them. And an important step has been made last year when the long-awaited legal framework for the Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICAC, has been finally adopted. And now we are eagerly expecting the effective establishment and functioning of this important institution, and we are fully committed to support it. In fact, the EU will provide technical assistance for ICAC from this year already. At the same time, of course, further steps need to be taken in order to ensure progress on key anti-corruption laws and further increase public accountability. Thus, we are expecting to see some progress on the freedom of information legislation, as well as the implementation of a conflict of interest and asset disclosure regimes. On this topic, I will highlight that over the past few years, the European Union has provided extensive support to public finance management reform. And also in the same context, the adoption of the new public financial management roadmap is an essential step that needs to be taken. In addition, as we come closer to the 2022 general elections, let me refer to the importance of ensuring the necessary reforms in the PNG Electoral Commission. The recommendations made by the EU experts following the general elections in 2017 were fully embedded into the Electoral Commission reform agenda, but as always, implementation is still lagging. Dear partners, today I'm looking forward to the presentation of the National Integrity System Assessment, an evaluation work of more than 100 pages that can constitute a veritable blueprint for enhancing integrity and accountability in the public sector in PNG. And the EU is proud of having supported this work. Let me conclude by reiterating once again our firm commitment to stand by the PNG government, the civil society and the media in the fight for better governance and integrity in this beautiful country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silviu Jora, Deputy Head of the EU Delegation to Papua New Guinea. Before I move on to the next speaker for the opening session, I would like to again acknowledge the presence of the Secretary for the Department of Prime Minister, Mr. Ivan Pomelo, the Director of the National Fraud and Anti-Corruption Directorate, Mr. Matthew Damaru, the Director of FASU, the Bank of PNG, Mr. Benny Popoitai, Directors from TIPNG, Secretary Ms. Michelle Halfa, and Director Mr. Philip Sama. As Dr. Jora mentioned, we are here to launch the National Integrity System Assessment Report 2021. I now invite my colleague, Yuambari, to give the presentation on the key findings of the National Integrity System Assessment 2021.
Good morning, everyone. I acknowledge the presence of the Prime Minister, the Deputy Head of the EU Delegation, Chairman Mr. Aitsi, all the distinguished guests we have in the room with us this morning, and also those watching online in PNG and abroad. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll be speaking to, which will be appearing on your screens and also being shared on our Facebook live stream and on our Zoom participation. The report that I'm making reference to will be in your information pack. It's the publication that was mentioned by our last speaker, Dr. Jora. It's the thick document looking at the assessment. Yep. So my presentation is really to provide an overview for our guests, for the participating agencies, for the people of Papua New Guinea and those interested in governance in Papua New Guinea. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Yuambari Haihuie. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Partnerships with TIPNG. Sorry, just a bit of a technical difficulty here. So just an overview of my presentation. I'll be looking at the results of the assessment, but more importantly, looking at why we had to do the assessment, what we're hoping to do with the assessment, some of the key findings, the trends and analysis, and then looking forward, what are the recommended actions that we would like to see in PNG. This report is a monumental document. It's something that we're hoping will support a lot of the work of the agencies in the room and inform some of the actions that we would like to see by people of goodwill in Papua New Guinea seeking to improve the national integrity. At the outset, it's important to think, why is integrity important? And I think it was touched upon by the previous speakers. Why is integrity important in PNG? We should assess the levels of integrity in PNG because integrity is a barrier to corruption. Corruption impacts all our lives. The image that we have up here on the presentation is of a girl selling biros outside Boroko in Port Moresby. She was selling biros to make a living in Port Moresby because corruption stole her education. Corruption steals the future of our children, the future of our country, impacts all of us. If we have strong national integrity, if we know the levels of integrity in our country, it acts as a barrier to corruption. Integrity establishes principles of good behavior that we all agree to abide by. And corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. So if we have a set of rules that we all apply, that we all follow, then we will have a minimizing effect on the amount of abuse of entrusted trust in PNG. So at the background of all the work that we do, we have to remember that we are trying to strengthen national integrity as a barrier to corruption so that we can have a better future for all Papua New Guineans. What is the national integrity system in PNG? I have up on here the presentation, a schema just showing what the national integrity system is. You'll see at the bottom foundations. That's the politics of the country, the culture of the country, society, the economy. That's the foundation upon which we have a national integrity system. This methodology was developed globally, but has been adapted by different countries for reports that have been produced looking at assessing levels of integrity. You will see the 14 black lines. Those are pillars of integrity. So when we do the assessment, we're looking at each of these pillars in society and how they support the national integrity in Papua New Guinea. You'll see the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, the public sector, law enforcement, the electoral management body, the ombudsman, the state audit office, anti-corruption agencies, the procurement office, political parties, media, civil society, and the private sector. Each of these comprise 14 of the pillars that uphold our national integrity at the top. The symbolism in this image is that if you have foundational issues, if you have systemic issues within those pillars, the structure will not stand. A house divided against itself will fall. We have to have national integrity within our pillars so we can have a national integrity system that strengthens our ability to combat corruption. This assessment that you have within your information pack today looks at a number of key indicators. It looks at 3 dimensions of integrity within the country. It looks at capacity, governance, and role. Within each of those dimensions, we then look at indicators. Indicators such as the resources to the pillars, the independence of the pillars, the transparency within the pillars, accountability, and integrity of the pillars. We also look at role-specific indicators for each of the pillars. So for instance, if we look at civil society, it's whether civil society is able to advocate freely. For each of these indicators, we then look at what the law says and what the actual practice is. So each of these indicators have 2 sets of assessment scores, which I'll go into further detail. As you can see, this is a very nuanced assessment of integrity in the country. And it's a tool that's been used by TI PNG previously, with the last assessment conducted in 2003. This report builds on that, but also looks at further detail and further work and further developments that have been done since 2003. So why are we doing the NISA? We find that the NISA tool is a useful tool. You might have seen some of the other transparency international tools like the Corruption Perceptions Index, which has been launched by the Prime Minister for the last 2 years. And that gives an indicator of assessing countries based on external assessments by independent assessors. This is an assessment in the country, looking at agencies and working with the agencies. So we find that it's got a richer data set. It's about experiences, it's about practices, it's about behavior and conduct. We find that it's an evidence-based approach, and we find that the analysis is a bit more flexible because it's qualitative. You'll see in the assessment that there's a couple of numbers there. Those are not mathematical numbers, those are quality indicators. And I'll go into detail the assessment scores that we have in the publication. In collecting the data, we did a lot of desktop research. We looked at the key laws, we looked at key policy documents, we looked at court judgments, parliamentary Hansard, our own reports within TIPNG, statistics of cases that we've received. We looked at published reports and research within the field in Papua New Guinea and abroad. We looked at media reports and also looked at questionnaires that we sent out to the agencies that are in the room this morning. We also had an advisory group based in Papua New Guinea, but also abroad, advising the content of the publication. Our board of directors at TIPNG also reviewed the publication, and we had anti-corruption experts give their views to inform the publication. I think the most important part and the most valuable part for us when we did this consultation was reaching out to the agencies in the room. I can see a lot of familiar faces because we came to you between September and February to ask you your views of what you thought integrity was like within your pillar. This assessment is not an assessment of agencies. It's an assessment of the pillars. So it's a systematic approach looking at where is integrity within Papua New Guinea. It's not a scorecard, it's not a report card on each of the agencies' performance. It's an assessment of the integrity system. But you'll see from the images that I have up here, we had meetings with the Bacon PNG Financial Analysis and Supervision Unit. We met with RPNGC, with Mr. Wagambi in the picture there. We met with agencies like Customs, who are responsible for enforcement of our borders and our customs collection. We also met with partners in the business and private sector. So we have an image of meeting with the Business Council of PNG, who will be participating in the summit. And at the bottom, we also have the media, One Talk newspaper. This is just a snapshot, really, of the agencies we met. Arian, in her presentation, or in her opening remarks, alluded to the number of agencies that we met, 28 in total. I think this is a testament to the appetite for integrity in Papua New Guinea. There are a lot of agencies that want to give their views and want to seek means of addressing the issues that we face. I think it's also a testament of the trust that agencies and partners have in TIPNG to deliver an independent, impartial, and accurate report of the state of integrity in Papua New Guinea. In the publication that you have, you'll see a number of tables for each of the 14 pillars. As I said, the scores are qualitative, so it won't be a mathematical calculation. It's not like the Corruption Perceptions Index. It's really an assessment based on the indicators that we have looked at each of the pillars. You'll see the scores are ranked from 1 to 5, 1 being the poorest and 5 being the highest. But I really want to point out that it's a qualitative assessment. So when we say 1, we mean that the integrity level within that particular indicator is insufficient or minimal. 2 means that it's somewhat insufficient. 3 is the most basic level of integrity that we can expect given the laws and the practice. 4 is somewhat adequate, and then 5 is adequate. So 5 is not great, it's not, this is award-worthy, it's just that this is meeting its expectations within the law and within its practice. So that's how you should read the scoring in the pillars when you read through the report. Please don't take it as a report card with an A, B, C, D, or a ranking like that. It's really to just give you a feeling of what is the level of integrity within that component. For each pillar, you'll note that the role-specific one is, again, specific to that pillar. So the one that is specific for judiciary is not the same as the one for law enforcement agencies, and those are scored differently as well. But each of the capacity and governance are scored the same in terms of each of them having the same indicators. The findings. This is the critical part of the assessment. These are the overall scores that we had when we looked at the assessment of integrity pillars across all 14 pillars. This is the overall score looking and taking into account the law and the practice and looking at the integrity level within each of these pillars. You'll note that there's only a range of 4 and 3 out of 5. There are 5 agencies that are 5 pillars that have 4, and the remainder all have 3. We would want to see, ideally, all of them at 5 or 4, maybe 3 if there are issues around structure or resourcing. But to have 4 and 3 is a bit concerning. There's further analysis in the report, but the overall analysis and the bigger picture that we're looking at is that we only have 5 pillars of integrity within PNG out of the 14 that are performing somewhat adequately. The others are at a basic level of integrity. There are a number of reasons for this. The 5 that we have there have very strong laws. They have very clear policies and practice that are aligned with those laws. So we have the judiciary. We also have the ombudsman there and the media. The 2 that are within those pillars that are newer or have had reforms recently, that's anti-corruption agencies and procurement, and that's why they score highly compared to the others. And when I say highly, again, remember that the top is adequacy. It's not great. We can go into finer detail, and I think this is really perhaps the key graph that I wanted to present to you. The overall scores gives you an overview of everything, but this graph shows you the difference between the practice and the law. So the darker bar graph is the law, and then the lighter red is the practice. If you look across all the pillars, you'll see that there is a substantial gap between the practice and the law. So the average of those scores is what we have for the overall score. But if you look at the scores for the practice, they're very poor. You'll see a number of them score below basic. There's only a few that score somewhat adequate, 3 for practice. But I think on the positive side, you'll see that a number of the laws score quite highly. In fact, almost all of the laws score quite highly. So the laws that we have are very strong in terms of integrity. It's the practice where we see the gap in integrity. We also looked at capacity and governance, and one of the main feedback that we received from agencies when we consulted was that there's a lot of good policies practiced, but then the capacity to fulfill them is lacking. This is also demonstrated in the assessment. So we can see that there's been strong governance, but then the practice component based on capacity is a bit scattered as well. Key findings, since the last report in 2003, we were looking at each of the pillars and their ability to implement, and we find that the lack of implementation is evident in the assessment. I think it's not a surprise for everyone in the room. It was alluded to by speakers prior to me, but it's very clear that we have a lack of implementation, and that leads to the gap in integrity that we see. What we really need to see is strong leadership in terms of bridging that gap between the integrity of the practice and the integrity of the law that we have in PNG. Since the last assessment, we've also seen that a number of the integrity pillars have been weakened or have not been strengthened. We've seen maybe some of the work that's been done in the executive also impact the work of the other pillars. And we see that there seems to be more of the political pressures on the pillars as opposed to maybe the legislative or the capacity issues. And that's one of the key trends in the analysis that we've done. But we have more detailed analysis in the report as well. There are strengths. There are a number of strengths. The good thing about this assessment, it also picks up what's being done well, where agencies maybe perform a little bit more than what they're legislated to actually do. So for instance, we have the executive doing more in terms of transparency that's actually legislated. We have the judiciary having highly fair capacity in terms of its provision of its constitutional mandate. The ICAC has been enacted since the last assessment that we've done, so that obviously bumps up the scores on the anti-corruption agencies. Public procurement reforms have gone through, and we now have a National Procurement Commission with a separate National Procurement Act. Again, that increases the scores that we have. Media and civil society in Papua New Guinea are relatively free. We were able to celebrate Media Freedom Day. We had media attend, and there's a lot of active civil society and media voices in Papua New Guinea. The private sector is also relatively free from the assessment, and that's one of the strengths that we have in terms of the Papua New Guinean integrity system. The gaps that I wanted to highlight in going towards the end of my presentation really focus on the role of Parliament as an accountability mechanism. These are really specific assessments on each of the pillars, and we do that for all 14, but we found that Parliament was falling short of its constitutional role, particularly in ensuring accountability across all the pillars. The electoral administration has also been impacted since the last assessment, and we found shortcomings in terms of the application of rules, management of human resources, and the conduct of ballot counting and declaration of seats since the last assessment. The ICAC, while it has been enacted, has not yet been operationalized. We know that the budget has been allocated for 2021, but processes around regulations and recruitment have not commenced. And then the degree of accountability of law enforcement agencies, which has always been an issue, seems to have also worsened recently from the assessment. Within the law enforcement agencies, we have very high standards of integrity within the law, but the practice is much more shorter of that expectation. So what can we do? With this report and with this assessment, looking at the trends, looking at the strengths and the weaknesses that we have within our integrity system, there are really 5 thematic actions that we can take. We can't really talk about laws because we already have sufficient laws. We can't say, look, we need this law, we need that law, we need this policy. What we really need is action by those that can take action. And really all of us can take action. The first recommendation that we have in the report is open up Parliament. Parliament has to be much more accountable. There has to be consultation with constituents. There has to be consultation with the public. Parliamentary committees need to sit. Bills need to be debated. People need to have a voice in Parliament. There has to be accountability. Reports have to be tabled. They have to be presented. They have to be read. And they have to be actioned. We need to look at the organic law of the integrity of political parties and candidates and restore some integrity to the way political parties conduct themselves in Parliament. Secondly, we have to make every vote count. The census was supposed to be conducted last year. It has been deferred to this year. The census is an important democratic tool within a democracy. We need to know how many citizens are here so that we can do the elections properly. We need to update our electoral rolls, ensure our electoral boundaries are sound. make sure that the democracy within our country is not diminished because of the lack of integrity within the system that we have. So we have to make every vote count. Third recommendation, we need to start ICAC strong. ICAC is already started up at a very high level because the laws are very strong. We don't want ICAC to end up in a situation which is similar to the other integrity pillars where we have diminished levels of practice within the ICAC. If we can see some of these shortfalls within the other pillars, we need to take actions immediately to prevent that. That requires strong recruitment, clear regulations for interactions with other agencies, and protected funding for the body to be able to carry out its work. We really need to bridge the integrity gap. That's one of the thematic areas that we're looking at. We need to make sure that we have internal anti-corruption strategies within the pillars and within the agencies. Because if we're seeing a lack of implementation, that means that there's no demand. People are not pushing on it, whether internally within the organization or among society and the people at large. We need to have internal anti-corruption strategy within each agency so that they know how to strengthen the integrity of their own agency and so strengthen the integrity of the pillar. It will also empower citizens, the media, and the private sector who might want to invest in the country. And then lastly, we have to let the people know. We need to increase levels of transparency. We need to have an effective framework for freedom of information, but not just a law. We have to have an implementation of that law in all aspects, whether that's the releasing of public documents, press briefings, quarterly press statements, briefings to the media. That needs to happen so that we have increased access and knowledge of what's happening. In the absence of knowledge, we have falling levels of integrity across the pillars. That's really the overview and the analysis of the report. We find that it's a report that looks at both the positives and the negatives, but there is definitely a substantial integrity gap in Papua New Guinea caused by a lack of implementation. We really need to take action as a whole of society, and this is why we wanted to have the summit with you, agency representatives and you watching online, to be aware that these are some of the issues that we have in terms of our implementation. But at the end of the day, we still need to have that strong national leadership and coordination. We have to share information, and that's why we have all these panels within this summit to try and get the dialogue going so that people know what's happening within the integrity space in Papua New Guinea. We have strengths that we can depend on, and we need to use them to overcome our weaknesses. And together we can work together to rise above corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuambari, for your presentation of the National Integrity Systems Assessment 2021. I would now like to invite the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honourable James Marape, to give his keynote address for the opening session of the first National Integrity Summit.
All right, thank you very much, Ariana. Thank you very much for your kind words and your introduction of myself to the podium. Let me acknowledge the chair of PNG Transparency International, Mr. Peter Aitsi. Thank you again for your strong stewardship and your oversight in this important organization that always stands as an advocate for freedom of our country from the scourge of corruption. I also acknowledge our partners in development, a very strong partner to Papua New Guinea, European Union, and represented by the Deputy Head, Dr. Silviu Jora. Thank you very much for your presence, and I noted with interest the words that you've outlaid for us. I'm privileged to be with us in this important in fact, the inaugural conversation, the first National Integrity Summit, and thank you for inviting myself and the Department of Prime Minister and NISA for our presence here. I will read through my prepared speech, but firstly, let me congratulate Transparency International for yet again another important milestone event. It may be small here, but I note audiences tuning in by way of accessibility to our various media platforms. And let me acknowledge those of you who are here, our invited guests who are physically present, as well as those who are tuning in for this dialogue, for this conversation, for this summit, so that when everything is said and done, hopefully we are enriched with correct and accurate information, but more importantly, not just for our personal enrichment, but for us all to find our space in how best each and every one of us can be agents of good governance, agents of transparency, agents of fighting corruption, and agents who will help make our country better from where we are today. I did acknowledge the European Union already, and let me also acknowledge many other stakeholders in this advocacy and our fight against corruption and for this event, those who have put their hand together to stage this important event. My topic for this morning's session, as I speak, is Together Against Corruption. It denotes the concept of a partnership in a quest for an outcome, especially an outcome for us to contain and stop or eradicate corruption in our country. We are in this together. Governments and all agencies of government, private sector, donors, civil society, all individuals in our economy, and all citizens of our country. Each of us have our defined roles, and each of us have our set of governance and accountabilities that hold us to account to ourselves and to our constituents or to the organizations that we represent. Allow me just to react briefly to the importance of the integrity system assessment before I take a brief moment to speak about what we are doing as a government. This is an important event which delivers a report that compels us to talk about how different parts of our system measures up on an integrity scale. It obviously highlights in some ways where the center of our focus should be when we talk about the lack of transparency or indeed fighting corruption at different levels. It provides a baseline data which could allow us to measure our progress over time. It compares us to the legal intents of the law as it is against common and accepted practice over time. But I believe at some point we must move further and place the laws and systems through a series of stress tests to determine whether it holds up to some form of universal standard of integrity. If it holds up, we sustain it. If it is found wanting, we improve it. And I speak from the backdrop of a government on record. Many governments have spoken about passing laws. My government stands proud as the one that delivers few laws, chief amongst them ICAC. It recognizes that all of us are in this journey. This report places us where we ought to be able to help the integrity of our collective system. I note that the last National Integrity System Assessment was in 2003. Certainly, it has been a long time in between these assessments, if I'm not wrong. In this regard, I note the mixed results of the different NISA pillars in this year's report. It is a useful report that tells us that we can achieve strong outcomes through strong leadership, through strong legal structures that are independent and transparent. It also shows us that we have much work to do yet. It points us in the direction of focus and requires attention and effort by all of us concerned. The role of government is to establish legislative and policy guidance that allows every organization, communities, groups, and individuals to respond and build our own accountability systems. Accountabilities at different levels are what keeps all of us on track. If we have no sense of accountability, it does not matter what system you have, you will never embrace it. This is an important statement. It is not the government's role to come and establish for you what you should do if you are confronted with a choice of doing right or wrong. But the government can build a system that provides the guide rails and allows you to adopt a standard of behavior that is dignified and right. It is really incumbent on all individuals to build a system that works for yourself, that works for organizations, and in total works for our country. In that regard, my government continues to advocate for these important areas of work, which has been highlighted in the report as well. We operate at a level that allows an environment of transparency and accountability to incubate, and it allows for itself to grow strongly into the future and be sustained. I want to talk briefly on some important pillars, in fact, 6 important focus areas. Firstly, the parliamentary process. Parliamentary practice will continue to embrace the need for our citizens to know what is going on, and I note one of the recommendations that was presented earlier for a need for Parliament to be more transparent and for its proceedings especially to be broadcasted and for its functions to be held and for reports to be made known. And I take those recommendations to heart. Whether it is in the debate that is held or indeed in the strengthening of the parliamentary committee system, these functions must continue. Public accounts is an area of work that we need to embrace, and you've noted under my watch, we've tried to reset our public accounts, and public accounts is functional. Lately, with the movement of Sir John Pundari into the ministerial portfolio, we've now appointed a new member, the member for Goroka as chair of a public accounts committee. It is functioning, and it will be evident in some of the work that they will be doing in due course. Outcomes of these public account discussions have featured in important procurement, management, and administration outcomes in the health sector, for instance. We are also building some work around effectiveness and efficiency of the public service. And I also point that we've appointed the Honourable Gary Jufa, whose committee is now working to ascertain how best we could ensure our public service is effective and efficient without becoming an impediment to service delivery in our country. It will embrace some of the elements of law and practice that needs better and stronger outcomes. We also place spotlight on gender-based violence as an area of work that we have built from, and I'm happy to note that there have been some early progress on building a coalition of leadership in Parliament in this area. When Parliament takes leadership in various areas of work, the society takes keen interest and in most instances does follow. Women in Parliament is another area I'd like to speak on this as an area of spotlight, and I've also commenced discussion on women participation in the political process. We have now in discussion and consultation on possibly creating specialized seat for women, which is an agenda in my government, and we have intention to try to have a broader consultation, and hopefully the civil society can give a voice and we could allow for a greater women presence in our parliamentary system and structure, especially in the floor of Parliament, to ensure fair representation of women also in Parliament. I also note with keen interest a statement on the electoral process. My government is focused on delivering a free and fair elections in 2022, something that I personally hold close to my heart because sometimes some of us have been accused of tampering the electoral process. I want to personally give commitment in these proceedings this morning that for 2022, to the best of our ability, I know time is running out fast, and political instabilities that continues to permeate since the last 18 months or so I've been in office does not help, but commitment still remains that we want to deliver to the best of our ability a fair and free election where every vote is counted, as already alluded to. So in this regard, planning of election is firstly dependent on certain key indicators. Chief amongst them is key population data. And we intend to have a unified population census approach, and from one population database we could extrapolate common roll and others, so that our integrity of 2022 election is given high rating, and through a better, fairer election process, hopefully Parliament is emerged, of which leaders can be selected through a better system in the election process. Some line of thought that is emerging, Mr. Chairman and our partners, we focus on trying to mobilize an ID-based electoral process and hopefully a biometric sort of process. And we're working to amalgamate census, common roll update, NID, and all these different activities into one sort of symphony to have an outcome that holds our population to be accounted for, and population that is accounted for are the ones lining up in the queue for votes in 2022. So building a process that is absolutely essential in the electoral process, that has high integrity, is something that is chief in my government's radar, because I believe every person in our country is entitled to a fair vote, so that your vote and the result of your casting of ballots can be evident in whatever government takes shape beyond 2022. I intend also, and I'm speaking on media freedom, our government continues to embrace the freedom of media. I noted a few days back, there was some element of the police who arrested a worker in one of our news outlets. May I say, once of events like this happen, or events like this happen, but this is not a whole of government sanctioned approach. Somebody from an agency of government may encroach into the domain of media freedom, or those who work in our media space. But we must know, government and Papua New Guinea, we are a robust democracy, and freedom of media remains a fundamental foundation and character of our democracy. And our government today stands to maintain this key pillar of our society. And I don't think any government, especially a democratic government into the future, will tamper with freedom of media. And let me assure each and every one that freedom of media under my watch will remain, and let me also assure our economy and observers in our economy, our society, our civil society, our citizens, our population, that into the future no government will come in to tamper into that right. That right is secured by constitutional provision, and we at all times must protect media freedom. But having said this also, there must be accountability also on the other side for those who use what is provided for in a constitution as a free voice. That free voice must also be held to account for accurate presentation of reporting and media. For it is not absolute privilege, it is a qualified privilege. Let me also speak on fifth topic, on ICAC. We have delivered ICAC. However, I am first to admit there's always room for improvement. As I said earlier, any loss, and in this instance while speaking on ICAC, pick a copy of this law for all of you who are stakeholders in corruption in our country. Look into this, and if there are rooms for improvement, then I am ready and available, and ICAC, as we have the interim structure we have, is ready and available. The whole of government system is ready and available to tap into recommendations that is put forward on how best we will improve ICAC. Something that I am personally interested into proposing an amendment in our present ICAC is to ensure that the foundational commissioners are overseas-based commissioners, at least for a minimum span of possibly 10 years, 15 years, so that they remain away from the knowledge of our structure of society, and they could come in to do work with high integrity, not to question our local Papua New Guineans. We have so far some best well-known corruption fighters amidst us. And I know the presence of Mr. Elu, who continues to sit here and work for ICAC. I note with great respect to Chief Superintendent Damaru, who's possibly amongst us here, some Papua New Guineans who've been great stars in the advocacy and fight against corruption. They will definitely continue to find a place in the way our country continues to fight against the scourge of corruption. But for ICAC, as I speak, we did deliver the bill after a much long protracted debate. I almost lost government one day after delivering ICAC, mind you. And so for corruption advocates, never take it for granted that it's easier to pass these sort of laws. And we are committed to ensuring that further reforms are being done in that space. And as I said, this bill is bigger than myself as James Marape or my peers in present generation politicians. We will come and we will go, but such laws will remain with us as fences to ensure our country is safe from corruption now and corruptions into the future. And I ask each and every one of you who are here today, pick a copy of this law, read through with it, and if there is ways or further work that we need to do, we are here to assist and deliver those changes. I also would like to speak and encourage that other associated laws that will work in congruent to the spirit of ensuring that we have laws that safeguard our country from corruption further strengthened. We know we also have delivered the Whistleblowers Act, and this law with the ICAC law will work side by side in tandem to ensure that corruption is fought and policed in our country. I also propose at this juncture that my government is also looking at and delivering, and when we resume Parliament in August, we're reorganizing Parliament now to ensure we are working in a corporate COVID-sensitive manner. We got the public gallery and the normal chambers. We're trying to use that all convert into one so that we could sit in a COVID space and function as Parliament. And so in the 6 or 7 months that is left before Parliament, this Parliament rises for election, we still have time to deliver some more laws. As I said, laws are important, and with the law in place, then it will be up to those of you who are administering these laws and policing these laws to make it happen. And so something that I still will propose to do, bring before this Parliament rises, is a bill that we are currently promulgating. It's a bill entitled Unexplained Wealth Bill. For those who suddenly amass houses or amass cars, the country deserves to know where is your source of revenue. And this is something that I personally am keen to put across, so that we live and work in a society that has people earning a honest living, instead of those who accumulate wealth from sources that is not proper and not correct. So my government also prepares and is planning to have the Unexplained Wealth Bill brought before House in the second part of this Parliament. As we continue to recognize our challenges, we also note that our institutions are weak. Having law is one thing, but effective policing, effective prosecution, and effective conviction, securement of those who are found to have breached those laws that we promulgate are important for our country. And I noted with keen interest the findings of the present report that was tabled by Transparency International in this summit earlier. The ranking, we have laws that is ranked amongst the best on planet Earth, but the actual result of these laws is still lagging behind. We're averaging at 3, and this is something that we need to match. Creating law is one thing, but policing of these laws and delivering to expected intention of the laws is something that we must all work. And I bring my personal commitment to the table to ensure that we work this, and our government in summary and in conclusion, will not encroach into the policing of these laws that we have. Our business is to set up the laws and the public policies, and it is up to the agencies who operate those laws and policies to ensure you work them without compromising to one-talk system. You work them without compromising to complacency, or you work them without yourself compromising to corruption. The work rests with every one of us. You expect your government to create public laws and public policies. Well, governments of past have done them or have tried to do them. My government is doing our absolute best, as evident in delivery of ICAC and our commitment to further look into existing laws in ICAC, Whistleblowers Act, or other criminal laws we have in our country. And if we can work together to improve them, we will improve them. But I ask each and every one of you who work in those sectors, let us rise the occasion to ensure we police those sectors and make it work for our country. For the future of our country is in the hands of our present-day generation. When I talk about Take Back PNG, of course, the philosophy is big and broad. Fighting for resources is one thing. But getting more from our resources is totally in vain if every Papua New Guinean in the strata of government, or if every Papua New Guinean in the private sector, or if every Papua New Guinean and those who reside in our economy rises above two things that I mention every time when I talk about Take Back PNG. That is complacency and corruption. For laws can be passed, but it is as good as those of us who manage the agencies and work in those sectors to ensure we ourselves too rise above complacency and corruption to make it work for our country today and for the future. God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you, Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honourable James Marape, for your keynote address and also for your personal commitment to the strengthening the national integrity of Papua New Guinea. As the pillars suggest, as the 14 pillars that were presented in the National Integrity System Assessment 2021, it requires all of us, all of government, all of civil society, all of society working together to strengthen our national integrity system and together rise above corruption. I would now like to, so we're now going to move to really the official launch, and this will be a photo shoot with an image of the structure of our national integrity. And so I invite the Honourable Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honourable James Marape, the Deputy Head of the Delegation of the EU to PNG, Dr. Silviu, and the Chairman of TIPNG, to stand with the image to depict the partnership our country needs to bridge the integrity gap.
So I think it's a great moment, a great achievement we can celebrate. So I'm proud to partner with the government of PNG and with Transparency International for these great products and this great blueprint for addressing transparency and integrity and the fight against corruption in PNG. So from our part, this is it. Proudness, and now it's the moment to implement the recommendation from now on. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
For our viewers that are on the live stream and on Zoom, we will be providing a copy of the National Integrity System Assessment Report linked to you shortly. And so I thank our distinguished speakers, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honourable James Marape, the Deputy Head of EU Delegation to Papua New Guinea, Dr. Silviu Jora, Chair of Transparency International, Mr. Peter Aitsi. I thank our Zoom participants for joining the opening session, and I thank those that have joined us on the live stream on Facebook as well. We have great challenges and even greater opportunities ahead of us. And with your help, with your partnership, we will meet them and make the next few months one committed to action, integrity, and partnership. Thank you all for your time for the opening session of the first National Integrity Summit, and we will now break for morning tea. But we thank again the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honourable James Marape, for being present with us for the opening session. Yes. So the Honourable Prime Minister will be taking his leave at this point, and he thanks you all for being here, but he will now take his leave. For our Zoom participants, the link for the first panel session for today should start in the next 10 minutes. We are behind by schedule, but please note we will start the panel session at 10 to 11. So 10 to 11, so 10:50 a.m. The participants that are here, we invite you to proceed to the refreshments area, which is out the door on your left, and please help yourself to some morning tea. Thank you.